In the deepest depths of Stirling University lies a man who ponders important questions. Not questions like, what's the meaning of life, or why are we here? But questions that center over one concept. How do I scare my audience? Tonight, he will answer that question, reading tales that are so utterly horrifying they may leave you weak at the knees. Welcome to the Spook Zone.
Ladies, gentlemen, other eldritch abominations, I welcome you to the Spook Zone. In fact, it's the first Spook Zone of the semester, so round of applause all round. Good enough. Okay, I'm really excited to be back. I like reading things to you boys and girls and other eldritch abominations. So speaking of which, if you're an eldritch abomination, can you make 2017 a bit better than last year? I don't expect anything to be quite as bad as last year, but you know, we're off to a bad start already, so do the thing. Don't suck. Thank you. What's on the agenda today, then? Well, most of you know this by now if you've tuned in before. We've got two things. Firstly, we're reading a bit of Lovecraft from the commemorative edition of the Necronomicon, the best weird tales of H.P. Lovecraft. Here's how loud it is when you drop it on the floor. Real loud! It's great! And we've also got something from the internet, because Lord knows those people on the freaky, freaky web can do some horrible, horrible things. Including some horrible bits of writing. Funny joke. You're all great at writing, I'm sure. I'm not, actually. I'm just trying to make you boys feel better. Okay, so what are we actually reading from Lovecraft today? Well, if you've been paying attention or been listening to the series on whatever sort of way you have been doing it, you will know that we've been reading a little tale called Herbert West, Reanimator. And, for those of you who aren't in the know, Herbert West is a bad boy who likes making people come back to life even though they really shouldn't be coming back to life. And what's happened is, our narrator has learnt that he's been doing these experiments to people that he actually likes and knows, and it's getting a bit weird. So, yeah, it's gonna be a fun ride. This is a continuation after the narrator realizes that Herbert West has put some stuff into their old sort of boss, and he's gone about the town rampaging all zombie-like, and it's not been so good. And Herbert West sort of contemplated the motions, and he was like, damn, it wasn't quite fresh enough in terms of the corpse. Nice man. So, let's get down to business, not defeat the Hun, but in fact, start reading some stuff. Hopefully you enjoy. Maybe you will. Maybe you won't. Hopefully you will. This is part 3 of Herbert West, Reanimator. 6 Shots by Moonlight. It is uncommon to fire all 6 shots of a revolver with great suddenness when one would probably be sufficient, but many things in the life of Herbert West were uncommon. It is, for instance, not often that a young physician leaving college is obliged to conceal the principles which guide his selection of a home and office. Yet that was the case with Herbert West. When he and I obtained our degrees at the medical school of Missaconnet University, and sought to relieve our poverty by setting up as a general practitioners, we took great care not to say that we chose our home because it was fairly well isolated and near as possible to the potter's field. Reticence such as this is seldom without a cause, nor indeed was ours, for our requirements were those resulting from a life work distinctly unpopular. Outwards we were doctors only, but beneath the surface were aims of a far greater and more terrible moment, for the essence of Herbert West's existence was a quiet quest amid a black and forbidden realm of the unknown, in which he had hoped to uncover the secret of life and restore to perpetual animation the graveyard's cold clay. Such a quest demands strange materials, among them fresh human bodies. And in order to keep supplied with these indispensable things, one must live quietly and not far from a place of informal internment. Wes and I had met in college, and I had been the only one to sympathize with his hideous experiments. Gradually I had become to be his inseparable assistant, and now that we were out of college, we had to keep together. It was not easy to find a good opening for 2 doctors in company, but finally the influence of the university secured us a practice in Bolton, factory town near Arkham, the seat of the college. The Bolton Worsted Mills are the largest in the Miskatonic Valley, and their polyglot employees were never as popular as patients with the local physicians. We chose our house with the greatest care, seizing at last on a rather run-down cottage near the end of Pond Street, 5 numbers from the closest neighbour, and separated from the local potter's field by only a stretch of mellow land, bisected by a narrow neck of the rather dense forest which lies to the north. The distance was greater than we had wished, but we could get no nearer house without going on the other side of the field, wholly out of the factory district. We were much not displeased, however, since there were no people between us and a sinister source of supplies. The walk was a trifle long, but we could haul our silent specimens undisturbed. Our practice was surprisingly large from the very first, large enough to please most young doctors and large enough to prove a bore and a burden to students whose real interest lay elsewhere. The mill lands were somewhat turbulent inclinations, and besides their many natural needs, their frequent clashes and stabbing affrays gave us plenty to do. But what actually absorbed our minds was the secret laboratory we had fitted up in the cellar, the laboratory with the long table under the electric lights where in the small hours of the morning we often injected West's various solutions into the veins of the things we dragged from the potter's field. West was experimenting madly to find something which would start man's vital motions anew after they had been stopped by the thing we called death, but had encountered the most ghastly obstacles. The solution had to be differently compounded for different types. What would serve for guinea pigs would not serve for human beings, and different specimens required large modifications. The bodies had to be exceedingly fresh, or the slight discomposition of brain tissue would render perfect reanimation possible. Indeed, the greatest problem was to get them fresh enough. Wes had had a horrible experience during his secret college researches with corpses of doubtful vintage. The results of partial or imperfect animation were much more hideous than were the total failures, and we had both held fearsome recollections of such things. Ever since our first demonic session at the deserted farmhouse on Meadow Hill in Arkham, we had felt a brooding menace. And West, though a calm, blonde, blue-eyed scientific automaton in most respects, often confessed to a shuddering sensation of stealthy pursuit. He half felt that he was followed, a psychological delusion of shaken nerves enhanced by the undeniably disturbing fact that at least one of our reanimated specimens was still alive. A frightful, carnivorous thing that in a padded cell at Sefton. Then there was another, our first, whose exact fate we never learned. We had fair luck with our specimens at Bolton, much better than in Arkham. We had not been settled a week before we got an accident victim on the very night of burial, and made it open its eyes with an amazingly rational expression before the solution failed. It had lost an arm. If it had been a perfect body, we might have succeeded better. Between then and the next January, we secured 3 more. 1 total failure, 1 case of marked muscular motion, and 1 rather shivery thing. It rose of itself and uttered a sound. Then came a period where luck was poor. Interments fell off, and those that did occur were specimens either too diseased or too maimed for us. We kept track of all the deaths and their circumstances with systematic care. One March night, however, we unexpectedly obtained a specimen which did not come from the potter's field. In Bolton, the prevailing spirit of Puritanism had outlawed the sport of boxing, with the usual result. Surreptitious and ill-conducted bouts among the mill workers were common, and occasionally professional talent of low grade was imported. This late winter night there had been such a match, evidently with disastrous results, since 2 timorous paws had come to us with incoherently whispered entreaties to attend to a very secret and desperate case. We followed them to an abandoned barn where the remnants of a crowd of frightened foreigners were watching a silent black forlorn on the floor. The match had been between Kid O'Brien, a lubbery and now quaking youth with the most unhibernarian hook nose, and Buck Robinson, the Harlem Smoke. The Negro had been knocked out, and a moment's examination showed us that he would be permanently remaining so. The body must have looked even worse in life, but the world holds many ugly things. Fear was upon the whole pitiful crowd, for they did not know what the law would exact on them if the affair were not hushed up, and they were grateful when West, in spite of my involuntary shudders, offered to get rid of the thing quietly, for a purpose I knew too well. There was bright moonlight over the snowless landscape, but we dressed the thing and carried it home between us, through the deserted streets and meadows, as we had carried a similar thing on the horrible night in Arkham. We approached the house from the field from the rear, took the specimen in the back door and down the cellar stairs, and prepared it for the usual experiment. Our fear of the police was absurdly great, though we had timed our trip to avoid the solitary patrolman of that section. The result was wearily anticlimactic. Ghastly as our prize appeared, it was wholly unresponsive to every solution we injected in its black arm. Solutions prepared from experience with white specimens only. So, as the hour grew dangerously near to dawn, we did as we had done with the others. Dragged the thing across the meadow to the neck of the woods near the potter's field and buried it there in the best sort of grave of the frozen crown could furnish. The grave was not very deep, but fully as good as that of the previous specimen. The thing which had risen of itself and uttered a sound. In the light of our dark lanterns we carefully covered it with leaves and dead vines, fairly certain that the police would never find it in a forest so dim and dense. The next day I was increasingly apprehensive about the police, for a patient brought rumours of a suspected fight and death. West still had another source for worry, for he had been called in the afternoon to a case which ended very threateningly. An Italian woman had become hysterical over a missing child, a lad of 5, who had strayed off early in the morning and failed to appear for dinner, and developed symptoms highly alarming in the view of an always weak heart. It was a very foolish hysteria, for the boy had often run away before, but Italian peasants are exceedingly superstitious, and this woman seemed as much harassed by omens as facts. About 7 o'clock in the evening she had died, and her frantic husband had made a frightful scene in his efforts to kill West, who he wildly blamed for not saving her life. Friends had held him when he drew a stiletto, but West departed amidst his inhuman shrieks, curses, and oaths of vengeance. In his latest affliction, the fellow seemed to have forgotten his child, who was still missing as the night advanced. There was some talk of searching the woods, but most of the family's friends were busy with the dead woman and the screaming man. Altogether, the nervous strain on West must have been tremendous. Thoughts of the police and the mad Italian both weighed heavily. We retired about 11, but I did not sleep well. Bolton had a surprisingly good police force for so small a town, and I could not help fear the mess which would ensue if the affair of the night before was ever tracked down. It might mean the end of all our local work, and perhaps prison for both West and I. I did not like those rumours of a fight which were floating about. After the clock had struck 3 and the moon shone in my eyes, but I turned over without rising to pull down the shade. Then came the steady rattling at the back door. I lay still and somewhat dazed, but before long heard West's rap on my door. He was clad in a dressing gown and slippers, and had in his hands a revolver, and an electric flashlight. From the revolver, I knew that he was thinking no more but of the crazed Italian than of the police. "You better both go," he whispered. "It would do not to answer it anyway, and it may be a patient. It would be like one of those fools to try the back door." So we both went down the stairs tiptoe, with fear partly justified and the partly that which comes from only the soul of the weird small hours. The rattling continued, growing somewhat louder. When we reached the door, I cautiously unbottled it and threw it open. As the moon streamed revealingly down on the form silhouetted there, West did a peculiar thing. Despite the obvious danger of attracting notice and bringing down on our heads the dreaded police investigation, a thing which after all was mercifully averted by the relative isolation of our cottage, my friend suddenly, excitedly and unnecessarily, emptied all 6 chambers of his revolver into the nocturnal visitor. For that visitor was neither Italian nor policeman. Looming against the spectral moon was a gigantic misshapen thing, not to be imagined save in nightmares. Glassy-eyed, ink-black apparition, nearly on all fours, covered with bits of mould, leaves and vines, foul with caked blood, and having between its glistening teeth a snow-white, terrible, cylindrical object, terminating in a tiny hand. Just gonna check something. Yeah, I could do that. Right, that was part 3. Full disclosure, I may have just skipped a bit in that bit because it was, shall we say, when Lovecraft does what Lovecraft shouldn't be doing and decides to go on a bit of a, shall we say, racial tangent. There was a bit when he was talking about the Buck Robertson character, and he goes like this. This is how he describes him. "He was a loathsome gorilla-like thing with abnormally long arms, which I could not help calling forelegs, and a face that conjured up thoughts of unspeakable Congo secrets and tom-tom poundings under an eerie moon." He was a man of his time, and God, he was a racist man of his time. Christ. Lovecraft, you foolish man. Well, let's hope that the next chapter doesn't have so much, that. Anyway, this is chapter 4, The Scream of the Dead. The scream of a dead man gave to me that acute and added horror of Dr. Herbert West, which harassed the latter years of our companionship. It is neutral that such a thing as a dead man's scream should give horror, for it is obviously not a pleasing or ordinary occurrence. But I was used to similar experiences, hence suffered on this occasion only because of a particular circumstance. And, as I have implied, it was not of the dead man himself that I became afraid. Herbert West, whose associate and assistant I was, possessed scientific interests far beyond the usual routine of a village physician, and that's why, when establishing his practice in Bolton, he had chosen an isolated house near the Potter's Field. Briefly and brutally stated, West's sole absorbing interest was a secret study of the phenomena of life and its cessation, leading toward the reanimation of the dead through injections of an exicant solution. For this ghastly experimenting, it was necessary to have a constant supply of very fresh human bodies. Very fresh, because even the least bit of decay hopelessly damaged the brain structure, and human, because we found that the solution had to be compounded differently for different types of organisms. Scores of rabbits and guinea pigs had been killed and treated, but their trail was a blind one. West had never fully succeeded because he had never been able to secure a corpse sufficiently fresh. What he wanted were bodies from which vitality had only just departed, bodies with every cell intact and capable of receiving again the impulse towards that mode of motion called life. There was hope that this second and artificial life might be made perpetual by repetitions of this injection, but we had learned that an ordinary natural life would not respond to the action. To understand and establish the artificial motion, nocturnal life must be extinct. The specimens must be very fresh, but genuinely dead. The awesome part of the quest had begun when West and I were students at the Miskatonic University Medical School in Arkham, vividly conscious for the first time of the thoroughly mechanical nature of life. That was 7 years before. But West looked scarcely a day older now. He was small, blonde, clean-shaven, soft voiced and spectacled, with only the occasional flash of a cold blue eye to tell of the hardening and growing fanaticism of his character, underneath the pressure of his terrible investigations. Our experiences had often been hideous in the extreme, the results of defective animation, when lumps of graveyard clay had been galvanized into morbid, unnatural, and brainless motion by various modifications of the vital solution. One thing had uttered a nerve-shattering scream. Another had risen violently, beating us both to unconsciousness and run amok in the shocking way before it could be placed behind an asylum bars. Still another, loathsome African monstrosity, had clawed out of its shallow grave and done a deed. West had to shoot that object. We could not get fresh bodies, enough to show any trace of reason when reanimated. So, had perforce created nameless horrors. It was disturbing to think that one, or perhaps two, of our monsters still lived. That thought haunted us, shadowingly, till finally West disappeared under frightful circumstances. But at the time of the scream in the cellar laboratory of the isolated Bolton cottage, our fears were subordinate to our anxiety for extremely fresh specimens. West was more avid than I, so that it almost seemed to me that he looked half covetously at any healthy living physique. It was July 1910 that the bad luck regarding specimens began to turn. I had been on a long visit to my parents in Illinois, and upon my return found West in a state of singular elation. He told me, excitedly, in all likelihood, solved the problem of freshness through an approach from an entirely new angle, that of artificial preservation. I had known that he was working on a new and highly unusual embalming compound, and I was not surprised that it had turned out well, but until he explained the details, I was rather puzzled as to how such a compound could help in our work, since the objectionable staleness of specimens was largely due to delay occurring before we secured them. This, I now saw, West had clearly recognized, creating his embalming compound for future rather than immediate use, and trusting to fate to supply again some very recent and unburied corpse, as it had years before we obtained the Negro killed in the Bolton prize fight. At last, fate had been kind, so that on this occasion there lay in the secret cellar laboratory a corpse whose decay could not by any possibility have begun. What would happen on reanimation, and whether we could hope for a revival of mind and reason, West did not venture to predict. The experiment would be a landmark in our studies, and he had saved the new body for my return, so that both might share the spectacle in accustomed fashion. West told me how he had obtained the specimen. It had been a vigorous man, a well-dressed stranger just off the train on his way to transact some business with the Bolton Worsted Mills. The walk through the town had been long, and by the time the traveller paused at our cottage to ask the ways to the factories, his heart had become greatly overtaxed. He refused a stimulant and suddenly dropped dead a moment later. The body, as might be expected, seemed to West a heaven-sent gift. In his brief conversation, the stranger had made it clear that he was unknown in Bolton, and a search of his pockets subsequently revealed him to be one Robert Levitt of St. Louis, apparently without a family to make inquiries about his disappearance. If this man could not be restored to life, no one would know of our experiment. We buried our materials in a dense strip of woods between the house and the potter's field. If, on the other hand, he could be restored, our fame would be brilliantly and perpetually established. So, without delay, West had injected into the body's wrist a compound which would hold it fresh for use after my arrival. The matter of the presumably weak heart, which to my mind imperiled the success of our experiment, did not appear to trouble West extensively. He hoped, at last, to obtain what he had never obtained before: a rekindled spark of reason, and perhaps a normal living creature. So, on the night of July 18th, 1910, Herbert West and I stood in the cellar laboratory and gazed at a white, silent figure beneath the dazzling arc light. The embalming compound had worked uncannily well, for as I stared fascinatedly at the sturdy frame which had lain 2 weeks without stiffening, I was moved to seek West's assurance that the thing was really dead. This assurance he gave readily enough, reminding me that the reanimation solution was never used without careful tests as to life, since it could have no effect if any of the original vitality were present. As West proceeded to take preliminary steps, I was impressed by the vast intricacy of the new experiment. An intricacy so vast that he could trust no hand no less delicate than his own. Forbidding me to touch the body, he first injected a drug in the wrist just beside the place his needle had punctured when injecting the embalming compound. This, he said, was to neutralize the compound and release the system to a normal relaxation, so that the reanimating solution might freely work when injected. Slightly later, when a change and a gentle tremor seemed to affect the dead limbs, West stuffed a pillow-like object violently over the twitching face, not withdrawing it until the corpse appeared quiet and ready for our attempt at reanimation. The pale enthusiast now applied some last perfunctory tests on absolute lifelessness, withdrew satisfied, and finally injected into the left arm an accurately measured amount of the vital elixir, prepared during the afternoon with a greater care than we had ever used since college days. When our feet were now new and groping, I cannot express the breathless, wild suspense with which we waited for the results on this first really fresh specimen, the first we could reasonably expect to open its lips in rational speech, perhaps to tell of what it had seen beyond the unfathomable abyss. West was a materialist, believing in no soul and attributing all the working of consciousness to bodily phenomena. Consequently, he looked for no revelation of hideous secrets from the gulfs and caverns beyond death's barrier. I did not wholly disagree with him theoretically, yet held vague, instinctive remnants of the primitive faith of my forefathers, so that I could not help eyeing the corpse with a certain amount of awe and terrible expectation. Besides, I could not expect from my memory that hideous and human shriek we heard on the night we tried our first experiment in the deserted farmhouse at Arkham. Very little time had elapsed before I saw the attempt was not to be a total failure. A touch of colour came back to the cheeks hitherto chalk white and spread out under the curiously ample stubble of sandy beard. West, who had his hand on the pulse of his lestrist, suddenly nodded significantly, and almost simultaneously a mist appeared on the mirrors inclined above the body's mouth. There followed a few spasmodic muscular motions, and then an audible breathing and the visible motion of the chest. I looked at the closed eyelids and thought I detected a quivering. Then the eyelids opened, showing eyes which were grey, calm, and alive, but still unintelligent and not even curious. In a moment of fantastic whim, I whispered questions to the reddening ears, questions of other worlds of which the memory might still be present. Subsequent terror drove them from my mind, but I think the last one which I repeated was, "Where have you been?" I do not know whether I was answered or not, for no sound came from the well-shaped mouth, but I do know that at that moment I firmly thought the thin lips started to move, silently, forming syllables which I could only vocalize as, "Only now," if that phrase possessed any sense or relevancy. At that moment, as I say, I was elated with the conviction that the one great goal had been attained, and that for the first time a reanimated corpse had uttered distinct words, impelled by actual reason. In the next moment there was no doubt about the triumph, no doubt that the solution had truly accomplished, at least temporarily, its full mission of restoring rational and articulate life to the dead. But in that triumph there came to me the greatest of all horrors. Not horror of the thing that spoke, but of the deed I had witnessed and one of the man with whom my professional fortune was joined. For that very fresh body, at last writhing into full and terrifying consciousness, with eyelids dilated at the memory of its last scene on earth, threw out its frantic hands in a life and death struggle with the air, and suddenly collapsing into a second and final dissolution from which there could be no return, screamed out the cry that will ring eternally in my aching brain. "Help! Keep off, you cursed little tow-headed fiend! Keep the damn needle away from me!" Herbert West probably stabbed that man in the chest with a needle, caused his heart to stop. What a cop-out, baby. Well, you're doing us good, Lovecraft. You didn't be that racist that time. Apart from in the beginning where you were like, reintroducing the story, and you did okay, we did all these other things, but then this other guy came in and he was a Negro, and he's obviously horrible. Goddamn, he's trying his best. At least the story's picking up now. I'm wondering where Herbert West is going to go with this. Certainly not in a good direction, because he's slowly but surely killing people to get experiments done, so that can only go one of two ways. Thankfully, also, we've only got 2 chapters left, so we're nearly at the end. Yeah, we can actually move on to another story after next week's little thingamabob. But yeah, that's part 2 of Herbert West, Reanimator. Well, part 3 and 4 of 6. Yeah, could be worse, could be better, could be better, could be worse. Of course, I think, as is the usual case with Lovecraft writing, it was released in sort of serial format, so it would be in a weekly or a monthly sort of book thing. So every time the story came out, they had to sort of recap and do all that sort of crazy, this is what happened last time sort of stuff. Anyway, let's go out of the Victorian era and into something a little bit more modern. This story is a little one called Bedtime. It's about a man who is not very cool with going to sleep and being scared of the dark and all of that sort of stuff. He's a bit, of course, as it turns out, it turns out there's a really good reason for him to be spooked about the night and bedtime. But hey, what you gonna do apart from scream when you learn the twist, as usually happens? Unless you don't scream, because I make things far too comedic when I mess up. Yep. Okay, so our next story is a little thing called Bedtime, and it's by Michael Whitehouse. Before that, I'm actually going to take a sip of a drink, because my throat is getting all parched. Do I have any drink left? Yes. Like a drop of Red Bull. This show is not sponsored by Red Bull and Red Bull related products. Don't buy Red Bull because I said I'm talking about Red Bull, even though Red Bull has been fueling me for the past few hours. I'm talking about Red Bull here. Sponsor me, Red Bull, you know you want to. Anyway, this is Michael Whitehouse. It's Bedtime. No more talking about Red Bull or trying to get product placements that I can't get because it's illegal, I think. I don't know how copyright and stuff works. Advertising? Pff, for nerds. I ain't a nerd. I'm a guy who just likes reading Lovecraft and scary stories for the amusement of myself, mostly. Please watch my show more. What the fuck was that? Okay, enough rambling. Jesus can't help me now, because we're going to get real spooky and scary and you know, Satanism and yada yada. Necronomicon. That wasn't the Necronomicon falling. This is bedtime. Don't go to sleep. Bedtime is supposed to be a happy event for a tired child. For me, it was terrifying. While some children might complain about being put to bed before they have finished watching a film or playing their favourite video game, when I was a child, nighttime was truly something to fear. Somewhere in the back of my mind, it still is. As someone who's trained in the sciences, I cannot prove that what happened to me was objectively real, but I can swear that what I experienced was genuine horror. A fear which in my life I'm glad to say has never been equalled. I will relate it to you all now as best I can. Make of it what you will, but I'll be glad to just get it off my chest. I can't exactly remember when it started, but my apprehension towards falling asleep seemed to correspond with my being moved into a room of my own. I was 8 years old at the time, and until then I had shared a room quite happily with my older brother. As is perfectly understandable for a boy 5 years older than my senior, my brother eventually wished for a room as his own, and as a result I was given the room at the back of the house. It was a small, narrow, yet oddly elongated room, large enough for a bed and a couple of chests of drawers, but not much else. I couldn't really complain, because even at my age, I understood that we did not have a large house, and I had no real cause to be disappointed, as my family was both loving and caring. It was a happy childhood during the day. A solitary window looked back into our back garden. Nothing out of the ordinary, but even during the day, the light which crept into that room seemed almost hesitant. As my brother was given a new bed, I was given the bunk bed which he used to share. While I was upset about sleeping on my own, I was excited at the thought of being able to sleep in the top bunk, which seemed far more adventurous to me. From the very first night, I remember a strange feeling of unease, creeping slowly from the back of my mind. I lay on the top bunk, staring down at my action figures and cars strewn across the green-blue carpet. As imaginary battles and adventures took place between the toys on the floor, I couldn't help but feel that my eyes were being slowly drawn towards the bottom bunk, as if something was moving in the corner of my eye. Something which did not wish to be seen. The bunk was empty, impeccably made with a dark blue blanket and tucked in neatly, partially covering two rather bland white pillows. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was a child, and the noise slipping under my door from my parents' television bathed me in a warm sense of safety and well-being. I fell asleep. When you awaken from a deep sleep to something moving or stirring, it can take a few moments for you to truly understand what is happening. The fog of sleep hangs over your eyes and the ears even when lucid. Something was moving. There was no doubt about that. At first I wasn't sure what it was. Everything was dark, almost pitch black, but there was enough light creeping in from an outside to outline that narrowly suffocating room. Two thoughts appeared in my mind almost simultaneously. The first was that my parents were in bed because the rest of the house lay both in darkness and silence. The second thought turned to the noise. A noise which had obviously woken me. As the last cobwebs of sleep withered from my mind, the noise took a more familiar form. Sometimes the most simplest of sounds can be the most unnerving. A cold wind whistling through the tree outside, a neighbour's footsteps uncomfortably close, or in this case the simple sound of bed sheets rustling in the dark. That was it. Bed sheets rustling in the dark, as if some disturbed sleeper was attempting to get all too comfortable in the bottom bunk. I lay there in disbelief, thinking that the noise was either my imagination or perhaps just my pet cat finding somewhere comfortable to spend the night. It was then I noticed my door shut, as it had been when I fell asleep. Perhaps my mum checked in on me and the cat sneaked into my room then. Yeah, that must have been it. I turned to face the wall, closing my eyes in the vain hope that I could fall back to sleep. As I moved, the rustling noise from underneath me ceased. I thought I must have disturbed my cat, but quickly I realized the visitor in the bottom bunk was much less mundane than my pet trying to fall asleep, and much more sinister. As if alerted to and disgruntled by my presence, the disturbed sleeper began to toss and turn violently, like a child having a tantrum in their bed. I could hear their sheets twist and turn with increasing ferocity. Fear then gripped me, not like the subtle sense of unease I had experienced earlier, but now potent and terrifying. My heart raced as my eyes panicked, scanning the almost impenetrable darkness. I let out a cry. As most young boys do, I instinctively shouted on my mother. I could hear something stir on the other side of the house, but as I began to breathe a sigh of relief that my parents were coming to save me, the bunk bed started to shake violently, as if gripped by an earthquake. Scraping against the wall, I could hear the sheets below me thrashing around as if tormented by malice. I did not want to jump down to safety, as I feared that the thing in the bottom bunk would reach out and grab me, pulling me into the darkness. So I stayed there, white knuckles clenching my own blanket like a shroud of protection. The wait seemed like an eternity. The door finally and thankfully burst open, and I lay bathed in the white light, while the bottom bunk, the resting place of my unwanted visitor, lay empty and peaceful. I cried, and my mother consoled me. Tears of fear, followed by relief, streamed down my face, yet through all the horror and relief, I did not tell her why I was so upset. I can't explain it, but it was as though whatever had been in that bunk would return, if even I so much as spoke of it, or uttered a single syllable of its existence. Whatever that was the truth, I don't know. But as a child, I felt that, as if that unseen menace remained close and listening. My mother lay in the empty bunk, promising to stay there until morning. Eventually my anxiety diminished, tiredness pushing me back towards sleep. But I remained restless, waking several times momentarily to the rustling of bedsheets. I remember the next day wanting to go anywhere, be anywhere, but in that narrow, suffocating room. It was a Saturday, and I played outside quite happily with my friends. Although our house was not large, we were lucky to have a long, sloping garden in the back. We played there often, as much of it was overgrown, and we could hide in the bushes, climb in the huge sycamore tree which towered above all else, and easily imagine ourselves in the throes of a grand adventure in some untamed, exotic land. As fun as it all was, occasionally my eye would turn to that small window. Ordinary, slight and innocuous, but for me that thin boundary was a looking glass into a strange, cold pocket of dread. Outside, the lush green surroundings of our garden, filled with the smiling faces of my friends, could not extinguish the creeping feeling clawing its way up my spine. Each hair was standing on end. The feeling of something in that room, watching me play, waiting for the night when I would be alone, eagerly filled with hate. It may seem strange to you, but by the time my parents ushered me into that room for the night, I said nothing, I didn't protest. I didn't even make an excuse as to why I couldn't sleep there. I simply and suddenly walked into that room, climbed a few steps to the top bunk, and waited. As an adult, I would be telling everybody about my experience, but even at that age, I felt almost silly to be talking about something which I really had no evidence for. I'd be lying, however, if I said this was my primary reason. I still felt that this thing would be enraged if I so much as spoke of it. It's funny how certain words can remain hidden from your mind, no matter how blatant or obvious they are. One word came to me that second night, lying there in the darkness alone, frightened, aware of a rotten change in the atmosphere, a thickening in the air, as if something had displaced it. As I heard the first casual twists of the bed sheets below, the first anxious increase of my heartbeat at the realization that something was once again in the bottom bunk, that word, a word which had been sent to exile, filtered up through my consciousness, breaking free of all repression, gasping for air, screaming, etching and carving itself into my mind. Ghost. As this thought came to me, I noticed that my unwelcome visitor had ceased moving. The bedsheets lay dormant, calm, but they had been replaced by something far more hideous. A slow, rhythmic, rasping breath heaved and escaped from the thing below. I can imagine its chest writhing and falling with each sordid, wheezing and garbled breath. I shuddered and hoped beyond all hope that it would leave without occurrence. The house lay, as it had on its previous night, in a thick blanket of darkness. Silence prevailed, but all but for the perverted breath of my as yet unseen bunkmate. I lay there terrified. I just wanted this thing to go, to leave me alone. What did it want? Then something unmistakably chilling transpired. It moved. It moved in a way different from before. When it threw itself around in the bottom bunk, it seemed unrestrained, without purpose, almost animalistic. This movement, however, was driven by awareness, with purpose, with a goal in mind. For that thing lying there in the darkness, that thing that seemed intent on terrorizing a young boy, calmly and nonchalantly sat up. Its laboured breathing had become louder, as now only a mattress and a few flimsy wooden slats separated my body from the unearthly breath below. I lay there, my eyes filled with tears. A fear which mere words cannot relate to you or anyone else coursed through my veins. I would not have believed that this fear could have been heightened, but I was so wrong. I imagined what this thing could look like, sitting there, listening from below my mattress, hoping to catch the slightest hint that I was awake. Imagination then turned to an unnerving reality. It began to touch the wooden slats which my mattress sat on. It seemed to caress them, carefully, running what I imagined to be fingers and hands along the surface of the wood. Then, with great force, it prodded angrily between the two slats, into the mattress. Even though through the padding it felt as though someone had viciously stuck their fingers into my side. I let out an almighty cry, and the wheezing, shaking, and moving thing in the bunk below replied in kind by violently vibrating the bunk as it had done the night before. Small flakes of paint powdered onto my blanket from the wall as the frame of my bed scraped along it, backwards and forwards. Once again I was bathed in light, and there stood my mother, loving and caring as she always was, with a comforting hug and calming words which eventually subdued my hysteria. Of course she asked what was wrong, but I could not say. I dared not say. I only said one word over and over again. Nightmare. This pattern of events continued for weeks, if not months. Night after night I would awaken to the sound of rustling sheets. Each time I would scream as to not provide this abomination with time to prod and feel for me. With each cry, the bed would shake violently, stopping with the arrival of my mother, who would spend the rest of my night in the bottom bunk, seemingly unaware of the sinister force torturing her son nightly. Along the way, I managed to feign illness a few times and come up with other than less truthful reason for sleeping in my parents' bed, but more often than not I would be alone for the first few hours of each night in that place. The room with the light from outside did not sit right. Alone with that thing. When, with time, you become desensitized to almost anything, no matter how horrific, and I had become to realize that for whatever reason, this thing could not harm me when my mother was present. I'm sure the same would have been said for my father, but as loving as he was, waking him from sleep was almost impossible. After a few months, I had grown accustomed to my nightly visitor. Do not mistake this for some unearthly friendship. I detested the thing. I still feared it greatly, as I could almost sense its desires and its personality, if you could call it that. One filled with a deserted and perverted and twisted hatred, yet longing for me. Of perhaps all things. My greatest fears were realized in the winter. The days grew short, and the longer nights merely provided this wretch with more opportunities. It was a difficult time for my family. My grandmother, a wonderfully kind and gentle woman, had deteriorated greatly since the death of my grandfather. And my mother was trying her best to keep the community as long as possible. However, dementia is a cruel and degenerative illness, robbing a person of their memories one day at a time. Soon she recognized none of us, and it became clear that she would need to be moved from her house to a nursing home. Before she could be moved, my grandmother had a particularly difficult few nights, and my mother decided that she would stay with her. As much as I loved my grandmother and felt nothing but anguish at her illness, to this day I felt guilty that my first thoughts were not of her, but of what my nightly visitor may do, should it become aware of my mother's absence. Her presence being the only thing which I was sure was protecting me from the full horror of this thing's reach. I rushed home from school that day and immediately wrenched the bedsheets and mattress from the lower bunk, removing all of the slats and placing an old desk, a chest of drawers, and some chairs, which we kept in a cupboard where the bottom bunk used to be. I told my father I was making an office, which he found adorable, but I would be damned if I gave that thing to sleep, a place to sleep for one more night. As darkness approached, I lay there knowing my mother was not in the house. I didn't know what to do. My only impulse was to sneak into a jewelry box and take out a small family crucifix, which I had seen there before. While my family was not very religious, at that age I still believed in God and hoped somehow this would protect me. Although fearful and anxious, while gripping this crucifix under my pillow tightly in one hand, sleep eventually came as I drifted off to dream. I hoped that I would awaken in the morning without incidents. Unfortunately, that night was the most terrifying of all. I woke gradually. The room was once again dark. As my eyes adjusted, I could gradually make out the window and the door and the walls, some toys off the shelf, and even to this day I shudder to think of it, for there was no noise. No rustling of sheets. No movement at all. The room felt lifeless. lifeless, yet not quite empty. The nightly visitor, that unwelcome, wheezing, hate-filled thing which had terrorized me night after night, was not in the bottom bunk. It was in my bed. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Utter terror had shaken the very sound from my voice. I lay motionless. If I couldn't scream, I did not want to let it know I was awake. I had not yet seen it, I could only feel it. It was obscured under my blanket. I could see its outline, and I could feel its presence, but I dared not look. The weight of it pressed down on top of me. A sensation I will never forget. When I say that hours passed, I do not exaggerate. Lying there motionless, in the darkness, I was every bit a scared and frightened young boy. If it had been during the summer months, it would have been light by then, but the grasp of winter is long and unrelenting, and I knew it would be hours before sunrise, a sunrise which I yearned for. I was a timid child by nature, but I reached a breaking point. A moment where I could wait no more, where I could survive under this intimately deviant abomination no longer. Fear can sometimes wear you out, make you threadbare, a shell of nerves leaving only the slightest trace of you behind. I had to get out of that bed. Then I remembered. The crucifix. My hand still lay underneath the pillow, but it was empty. I slowly moved my wrist around to find it, minimizing as best I could the sound and vibrations caused, but it could not be found. I had either knocked it off the top bunk, or it had... I could not even better think of it. Been taken from my hand. Without the crucifix, I lost any sense of hope. Even at such a young age, you can be acutely aware of what death is and intensely frightened of it. I knew I was going to die in that bed if I lay there, dormant, passive, and doing nothing. I had to leave that room behind. But how? Should I leap from the bed and hope that I make it to the door? What if it's faster than me? Or should I slowly slip out of that top bunk, hoping not to disturb my uncanny bedfellow? Realizing that it had not yet stirred when I moved, trying to find the crucifix, I began to have the strangest of thoughts. What if it was asleep? It hadn't so much as breathed since I'd woken up. Perhaps it was resting, believing that it had finally got me, that I was finally in its grasp. Or perhaps it was toying with me. After all, it had been doing just that for countless nights. And now, with me under it, pinned against my mattress with no mother to protect me, maybe it was holding off, savouring its victory until the last possible moment, like a wild animal savouring its prey. I tried to breathe as shallowly as possible, and mustering every ounce of courage I could, reached over slowly with my right hand to begin to peel the blanket off me. When I found under those covers, almost stopped my heart. I did not see it, but my hand moved the blanket and brushed against something. Something smooth and cold. Something which unmistakably felt like a gaunt hand. I held my breath in terror, as I was sure it must now have known that I was awake. Nothing. It did not stir. It felt dead. After a few moments, I placed my hand carefully further down the blanket and felt a thin, poorly formed forearm. My confidence and almost twisted sense of curiosity grew as I moved down further to a disproportionately larger bicep muscle. The arm was outstretched, lying across my chest, with the hand resting on my left shoulder as it tried to grab me in my sleep. I realized I would have to move this cadaverous appendage if I even so much as hoped to escape its grasp. For some reason, the feeling of torn, ragged clothing on the shoulder of this nighttime invader stopped me in my tracks. Fear once again swelled in my stomach and in my chest as I recoiled my hand in disgust at the touch of straggled, oily hair. I could not bring myself to touch its face, although I wonder to this very day what it felt like. Dear God, it moved. It moved. It was subtle, but its grip on my shoulder and across my body strengthened. No tears came, but God, how I wanted to cry. As its hand and arm slowly coiled around me, my right leg brushed against the cool wall which the bed lay against. Of all that had happened to me in that room, this was the strangest. I realized that this clutching, rancid thing, which drew great delight from violating a young boy's bed, was not entirely on top of me. It was sticking out from the wall, like a spider striking from its lair. Suddenly, its grip moved from a slow tightening to a sudden squeeze. It pulled and clawed at my clothes as if frightened that the opportunity would soon pass. I fought against it, but its emaciated arm was too strong for me. Its head rose up, writhing and contorting under the blanket. I now realized what it was taking me. Into the wall. I fought for my dear life. I cried, and suddenly my voice returned to me, yelling, screaming, but no one came. Then I realized why it was so eager to suddenly strike, why this thing had to have me now. Through my window, that window which seemed to represent such malice from outside, streaked hope, the first rays of sunshine. I struggled further, knowing that if I could just hold on, it would soon be gone. As I fought for my life, the unearthly parasite shifted, slowly pulling itself off to my chest, its head now poking from under the blanket, wheezing, coughing, rasping. I do not remember its features. I simply remember its breath against my face. Foul and cold as ice. As the sunlight broke over the horizon, the dark place, that suffocating room of contempt, was washed, bathed in sunlight. I passed out. Its scrawny fingers encircled my neck, squeezing the very life from me. I awoke to my father, offering to make me some breakfast. A wonderful sight indeed. I had survived the most horrible experience of my life up until then, and now. I moved the bed away from the wall, leaving the foot behind the furniture I had believed would stop that thing from taking a bed. Little did I think that it would try and take mine and me. Weeks passed without incidents. Yet on one cold, frostbitten night, I awoke to the sound of furniture where the bunk beds used to be, vibrating violently. In a moment it passed. I lay there sure I could hear a distant wheezing coming from deep within the wall, finally fading into the distance. I have never told anyone this story before. To this day I still break out in a cold sweat at the sound of a bedsheet rustling in the night, or a wheeze brought on by the common cold, and I certainly never sleep with my bed against a wall. Call it superstition if you will, but as I said, I cannot discount conventional explanations such as sleep paralysis, hallucination, or that of an overactive imagination, but what I can say is this. The following year I was given a larger room on the other side of their house, and my parents took that strangely suffocating, elongated place as their bedroom. They said they didn't need a large room. Just one big enough for a bed. And a few things. They lasted 10 days. We moved on the 11th. Ooh, that was a good one. I like that one. That was nice. Good writing by Michael Whitehouse. Boy knows his stuff. Knows monsters that try and claw at you in your bed. Moral of the story is, don't sleep with your bed against a wall or you'll be taken by the boogeyman. Or whatever creepy, terrible thing this is supposed to be. Something with big long hair, weird arms. Ugh. Ugh, that's nice. Oh Christ, my bed is against a wall. Uh-oh. Oh no. That's not good. But you know what? If it takes me, I'm sure it's better than the 2017 joke about the year being bad and very funny. You see that? That's the applause that no one's giving me because I'm not funny. Well, that was the show. I hope you enjoyed yourselves and enjoyed listening to me reading Lovecraft and a bit of racism in the middle there, as well as a genuinely quite pleasant story from the internet. That was Bedtime by Michael Winehouse, by the way. Go look that up. Give the boy a pat on the back. Give some internet points or something similar. I don't know. Don't know how this stuff works. Internet? Psh. More like Splinternet. Because, I don't know. I'm trying my best, okay? I'm trying to be a good host, and I just can't say things commonly. I just can't do it. It's not that good for me. I don't know. I just don't know. Okay, right. Okay, I'm going to stop doing that now because that was dumb. Anyway, that was the end of the show. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you come in next week, Saturday at 9. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Come in and watch the show, or I'll be very sad because, you know, I thrive on people listening to this show just as much as I thrive on Red Bull. That was a joke. That was a joke. You know, see, the joke is that Red Bull is good. That's about it. Huh. Oh, also, apparently there's a chat on Air 3 on the studio, like, you know, the Air 3 radio page. Huh. Wow. That's pretty wacky. Pretty crazy. So maybe next time you can go on the Air 3 website and say things while I watch and look at your comments saying, "Man, you suck. Stop mumbling." Or, "Man, this is really racist. You shouldn't be reading Lovecraft. You're racist." Or, "Stop." Probably the last thing will be quoted the most. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. This has been me, your host, and wishing you a happy 2017 and a happy new semester and a happy everything. But, above all, stay spooked.